graph of your given territory. When you interact with dynamic objects and their properties change, the state of that entity will not persist until this instance of the database is undeployed. There are, in fact, multiple copies of the universe that are seeded at a given time. We call those shards. Each shard is a unique copy of the game world, complete with all of its entities and unique states. Think of it as an alternate universe. Dynamic entities that have been modified in each dimension will have different states. The bottle on the bar was moved, or the door was destroyed, might not be in the same state between shards. This technique is a way to gain scalability as our player base grows. A single shard can grow to host multiple millions of entities. Even if each shard database is itself clustered and can grow substantially past a single machine, there is a point where multiple clusters are needed. As you join the persistent universe, the matchmaking system is getting retooled in order to select the correct universe shard for you to play on, using multiple data points like your friend's location, your active party, your last game session, and or which shards still have items on it that you own. This is to ensure as much as possible that you end up on the same shard you expect to be as a player. In order to provide a seamless game experience, it would be terrible if you lost items you used when you were in a given shard versus another, or if your character was bound to a shard forever. To alleviate this, the system includes the concept of stowed and unstowed entities. An item is considered unstowed when it is currently active in a shard database and being actively simulated on by the worker nodes of the replication layer. Stowed entities are player-owned entities that are stowed in inventory containers or location inventories. Those entities live in another database entirely, called the global database, a large clustered database that spans all shards. Aggregate roots in that shard are stored and linked with edges to inventory nodes. Any entity in a shard can have an inventory node in global for stowing things in it. For example, a box entity that is unstowed in a shard would have an inventory node in the global database to store its content. This allows to keep unsimulated entities in a non-shard specific database while keeping the live aggregate within the shard. As you transition between shards, your playing character gets unstowed into the selected shard. This process effectively moves your player aggregate data from the global database to the shard database. Your player entity now gets simulated by game worker nodes and is being updated at a regular rate as you play and move around the game world. Accessing items that are stowed, like a ship, from the ASOP terminal is basically reading the inventory contents of the global graph at your location. Same goes for personal inventories or cargo inventories. When you request a ship to be spawned, the system will unstow the ship onto a landing pad by submitting a shard mutation. Alternatively, when a ship gets despawned during parking at a rest stop, the ship gets stowed back into the global database, making it available for unstow in any shard. The global database is where all of your stowed items will live. Hero items will always be available for unstow in any shard if they are not already in use. The process of stowing and unstowing also helps to alleviate problems related to entity authority so that only game worker nodes in the right shard can update unstowed entities in that shard. This brings about a nice property of the server meshing and persistent streaming architecture in that the state of the entities are being persisted transactionally during play, be it in a shard or a global database through stowing. A single server crash, or 30K, should no longer result in item loss. This model also has a real scalability benefit that stems from the separation of the read-intensive workloads that are isolated to the global DB from the write-intensive workloads that are handled by the individual shard database. The global graph exists to provide seamless access to your belongings no matter what shard or alternate universe you're currently playing in. Okay, let's go back to Paul to learn about some of the benefits of the server meshing architecture.
Yeah, the first benefit is obviously the advantage that we don't have this issue of synchronization between different server nodes. Each server node has one single connection to the replication layer, which is used to push and get updates for entities of interest. The second advantage is that the same streaming and replication logic that we already use for clients can be applied to servers, and that server nodes will only stream in a small area, which will greatly increase performance. It also allows us to increase resilience down the road. As long as a client is connected to the replication layer, the client stays connected even if the server node crashes. In this case, the simulation for an entity may be stopped for a moment, but as soon as a new server comes online, the simulation will just continue. While the underlying tech is close to completion, there are some upcoming challenges that we need to solve before we can give that into your hands. The first version of this technology will contain a static server mesh. Instead of the fully dynamic mesh that we saw earlier, the static mesh assigns server nodes to predefined sections of the solar system. This will reduce the amount of authority transfer that game code has to address in this first release. There will also be a lot of challenges for the game services and game feature teams. Or maybe Benoit can give a little bit more.
Yeah, there are many parts of the game that are affected by this new server meshing architecture. So any gameplay features that has to rely on the concept of a server, right? Currently, when you connect to a game server, we know what match you're in. So to send messages and update to that server, we simply locate your active match and then send those messages out there. That concept needs to change because we now have a mesh to deal with. And so there are multiple game servers that need to receive this information. They need to be able to subscribe dynamically to it or unsubscribe dynamically to players transitioning through them. So you can imagine that this will affect things like missions that currently are spawned locally on the game server. These now need to be spawned globally within the shard and also persist their state. So all services that are attached to missions, whether it's the quantum system in the back end or the Quasar tools, need to now know about the concept of a shard. This also goes deep into like things that are mechanical, like getting global chat to work on a server. That concept now needs to be extended to the shard, where this will probably push us to implement this as a location-based chat, for example. And so many teams in the company now need to change their feature to take into account the meshing technology that's behind it, because the concept of server, which has been ingrained since the beginning, has changed to become a mesh of servers.
Yeah, exactly. So I also want to shout out to the network team who's working on the replication layer and the bind culling, as well as the persistent tech team who's working on the entity and object container streaming. And as Benoit said, also all the other teams that work on gameplay features or gameplay services that are affected by this new technology. There are a lot of devs working on this, and we are very excited to push on this new technology. Thank you for your time.
Incoming transmission.
Is this working? Good. Hey, look, I don't have much time. They call me Chris the Menace, and I have been framed for homicide. I am here at the Klesher Rehabilitation Center. I have a bounty on my head for 500,000 credits, because I am offering 1 million credits for somebody who come and rescue me. I can't leave. I am being watched. I need help. I don't have much time. Please come and help me.
Miners are of a unique breed. It's not about doing the job. It's about doing the job right. No matter how small or big, you need the right tools. Argo Astronautics, doing the job right.
From our starfarers to our labs, offices, and facilities, and in communities around the verse, we're continuously innovating to provide the energy solutions that advance modern life. Ultima Energy.
Who said he could use my set? All right, fine. So we're going to redo the whole thing now with no graphics and orange lights. Ready? So we introduced the replication layer, a new and improved architecture for meshing servers. It solves our problems observed in the naive meshing approach, namely multiple connections and authority. The entity graph is the persistence of the replication layer and uses graph data to persist the entire game universe. And the main focus of all of this is on making all game systems and features work in a no server concept where multiple servers are needed. Also, that the first release will likely be a static server mesh, and it will come, as all things do, I see you asking in the chat, when we feel it's ready. He really comes in here and uses my lights. Now, moving along, earlier in the day, we saw the first look at the Anvil Liberator, revealed earlier today during the Ship Talk panel. So check out the website to learn more, and you can submit your questions for the Q&A on Spectrum that'll be released in the coming days. Also, don't forget about the hashtag SC Watch Party on Twitter and Instagram contest. I can't help but notice that morphologists and Burks have one going, and I wasn't invited. I mean, I wasn't invited to any of them now that I think about it. I mean, 315's not out yet. I could just backspace and respond there in a JIP. I was going to do a gag where I hit the button and then fell on the floor, but I don't feel like it anymore. But up next, my vote for Sleeper Hit of the Day. Addie and Graham take us into the world of Claudius, the next big thing from CIG Audio, in the sounds of space, starting now.
Hi, my name's Graham Phillipson, and I'm lead audio programmer here at Cloud Imperium Games.
Hello, I'm Eddie Kelch, and I'm one of the sound designers working at Cloud Imperium Games.
And we're here to talk about some of the big developments we've got going on in audio tech, specifically SIG Audio and Claudius, which is a new audio engine layer and associated tool that we hope will greatly improve the development experience of our sound design team.
Getting started on this project can be quite challenging due to the amount of tools that we have involved in implementing audio into the engine.
And with the Claudius tool, we aim to streamline that process as much as possible. This talk will be very much focused on workflow and tech, and as such, there won't be too many sort of exciting explosion sounds going off and things like that. But, you know, this is all about how we improve the workflow for our sound design team, and we know these guys can make amazing sounds anyway.
Thanks, Graham.
So before we get into the new stuff, let's take a little look at the history and where we are now and what inspired us to go down this development path. Up until this point, so much of the data that we use has been owned and stored in the data of other tools that are not owned by the audio team or by the audio code team. Tools such as Mannequin, the character tool, TrackView, UI code, DataForge. All of these tools are designed for other teams to work with, and audio can sometimes feel like a bit of an afterthought within those tools. Additionally to this, because the data is stored within the files for those tools, we end up with a lot of data that's scattered around different areas. It can be difficult to dig in and find what we want. Also, when we're loading these tools, we have to load up all the data. So for example, if it's an animation tool, we have to load lots of animation data when really we're not actually working with that. There can be huge learning curves involved and lots of time spent switching between tools that impacts our development by swallowing up time. A lot of our ways of working haven't changed in a very long time, and we thought it was time to take a step back, look at all the challenges we face, and see if we can come up with solutions for all of them by coming up with a completely new design that addresses all the issues that we face day to day and tries to overcome them in an elegant way that makes the sound designers' lives much easier and makes their jobs much more fun. And this is what we came up with. So with Claudius, what we did was we put workflow at the very core of the design. From day one, when we started working on the design of the SIG Audio and Claudius systems, we wanted to make sure that workflow was always the focus of how things were working. We never wanted the tools to get in the way any more than they need to. And we wanted to make sure that the tools could be as smooth and as fun to use as they possibly could be.
I think that this designer comes first workflow is quite important, and it's going to become an integral aspect on this project. Currently, we have quite a bit of focus shifting, and that tends to break momentum. Not only that, audio seems to be treated a lot as a production aspect of the game at the moment, and this tool is going to help shift that to post-production, where it should be.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. One of the main things we wanted to do with the tool was to make sure that it could be used as a post-production tool, so that you could effectively take a finished feature of the game where no audio guy had seen it at all. The audio code could be implemented really quickly, and then the sound design could be implemented on top of that really quickly. And this could all be done completely downstream of all the stuff that happened before it. Obviously, in practice, we're working on this game in parallel with lots of other teams, and we never work in the sort of post-production way that, like an actual film post house would work. But by carrying over some of those principles, we think we've made a really good tool. And part of how we've achieved that is by sort of completely abstracting the audio data away from the code that calls it. The calling code knows nothing of what the result of what it is saying will do. So it will trigger some parameters and some events, but it doesn't know what the audio system will do as a result of that. And there's a very clear decoupling between the audio system and the game that calls it. And likewise, within the audio system, we don't care where the events and parameters came from. All we care about is what we do with them and how it makes things sound good.
And now, with all this data in one place, it's going to make it extremely swift and also a lot more inclusive to fix bugs. By inclusive, what I mean is audio QA is going to become an even more integral part of the team. They're going to be able to quickly fix these things on the fly.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. Because we've got all this data in one place, and we've also got the game's behaviors in one place, what we've done is we've integrated all the debugging tools into the exact same tool that the sound designers are using. So an audio QA person is working in exactly the same place, but they've got an interest in some different data. So what they care more about is like, why is something not sounding as it should? Or is the system behaving as it should? And we want to offer up all the information that they need. And what that means is that then they can easily pinpoint where the problems are. And in some cases, they can probably fix them because the fixes become so obvious. Coupled with that is that we want the sound designers to be able to completely trust the tool, so that when you implement something in Claudius, you know it's going to work in game. And fundamentally, there should be no difference between you implementing something and playing it out and actually running the game in a real game scenario and doing the same thing. So what we want to do is make it so that if anything doesn't work, that's a code bug, that's on us guys, we need to fix it, and you guys can completely trust the tool. And that means that you don't need to spend lots of time testing.
I think trust is a good word. I think that trust is also going to be coupled with just a whole new improvement in our daily lives when it comes to implementing audio into the game.
So let's take a little look at Claudius itself. What we've done is we've introduced a visual scripting language that allows you guys to implement whatever you want, and we provide tools that hopefully allow you to do all the creative things that you need to do with the audio. But the design of Claudius under the hood is interesting, because the tool itself doesn't hold any data of its own. All it does is exposes data that exists within the game engine. What this means for us is that live update, as in when you make a change in the Claudius tool, it live updates in the game and it immediately responds, and the change that you made is immediately apparent in the game. That means it comes as standard, because we're actually operating on the data that the game is running with. And actually, because of the design, it's not possible to implement an audio feature without implementing live update. And that was at the very core of this design, because again, we were completely thinking about workflow, about ease of use, and about limiting the amount of time you guys spend sort of, rebooting the game or, trying to get your actions to be reflected in the game.
You already mentioned it, but I think that, little to no code support aspect of Claudius is really going to be groundbreaking for us. I think that life is going to become iteratively a lot easier as we're able to just quickly, just not, again, focus shifting, right? That's not going to really be a thing anymore, and that's going to be great. Not only that, all these parameters that we want to get access to based on the data, we're going to get access to that by just going into the game, playing with something like a weapon, and by picking up that weapon, now that's going to, be inherited by the character. So it means that we're going to be able to attach all these different sounds to that gun based on what the player is doing. And I don't know, it's going to make so many of these things possible, and it just wasn't before.
Yeah, what we're trying to do is make so much data available to you where you need it and in an intuitive way. And what that means is that, when you, as you say, if you spawn a weapon in the game, it immediately becomes visible in the Claudius tool. And if you perform an action on that weapon, such as firing it or reloading it, those actions immediately become available and visible in the Claudius tool and available for you to implement. And what that means is that we're putting the implementation right alongside it happening in the game. Claudius uses a reactive programming model. And what that means is that as the data comes in, the visual side of what you see updates live, and it updates immediately. And it also has some sense of what's relevant, because if you're running an actor around, then the most recent events received by the game or sent by the game would be the movements of his limbs, the footsteps, that kind of thing. And you get to see those things immediately in the tool. And you can even filter by time. So you can look at things, you can like clear out the view, perform an action, and now that's the only thing you can see. So you get really quick, easy access to all the data that you need.
Yeah.
And all of this tech, I think, just puts us in a great position to continue to support the ever-increasing demands of CIG's games.
I also think that the designers are going to be quite empowered by the amount of time that they're going to have to focus on the creative aspects because of this tool.
Yeah, that's the whole philosophy of this design, is to empower the sound designers to be sound designers.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at a practical example, marking up a weapon in Claudius. As we've mentioned, all the events and parameters that arrive in the Claudius interface are things that have happened in the game. The game is just describing what's happened, and it doesn't have any preconceptions about what the audio system should do. It simply provides data. So, for example, the weapon fired, it now has 5 rounds in the magazine. The weapon fired again, it now has 4 rounds in the magazine, and lots of other information as well, such as the weapon fired and there was this much atmospheric pressure around it, or it was out in space and there was no pressure. All these sort of contextual things become available. And the decisions about what that data actually means to you guys all completely come down to you. So all we do is as programmers, we provide as much data as we possibly can in a place where you can use it.
What amazes me about this tool is it's going to just be as simple as, hooking up a couple nodes and seeing the results in the editor. Not only that, all this complex logic that we have, we're going to have access to all these parameters super easily. So the idea of, let's say, having a different reload sound based on the amount of ammunition in the mag it's going to be, rather simple to implement.
Yeah, absolutely. What we've done here is we've gathered all the data that may or may not be relevant to you, and we don't mind whether it is or not. We deal with all that code side, the efficiencies of that, and you guys get access to any data that you may or may not be interested in. So you could do like crazy things if you wanted. You could make it so that the reload sound sounds different if there are, like you say, if there are different number of rounds in the mag, but you might want to make the reload sound different if the character's wearing armor or not. Yeah. I mean, that makes no sense, but all this data becomes available to you, and it's totally up to you guys what you do with it. So we're opening up lots of possibilities.
I think that comes back to empowering the sound designers again. I think all this freedom creatively it's going to be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that sort of giving you that creative freedom, I think, is going to be amazing to see what comes out of that. Because for example, we can have something like a parameter that says whether it's nighttime or not. And if you wanted, you could change the whole aesthetic of the game, change all the sounds based on it being nighttime. Yeah. And that would require no input from the code team because we've given you the data that you need.
Yeah.
So let's dig down a little into some specific features of Claudius and look at budgeting and aggregation. In this video, we have a set of audio trigger spots that are all playing the same sound. We haven't applied any sort of budgeting to them, so they all play, they're all taking up resources, and we can hear them all, so the mix can be a little bit sort of muddied by just how many of them are playing. I want to show here just how simple it is to deal with that and to reduce the budget for the sounds that they're playing. So here we go to the audio source settings, and we're going to add a new category, which is how we budget, and we're going to reduce the number of sounds in that category that can play at any one time. As I said before, this all updates live, so every change we make now is going to be reflected in the game. And when we spin back to the game view now in the editor, you'll see that because we set the budget to 5, only 5 of those sounds are now playing, represented by the sort of lighter green. We can go back and we can change the budget, and again, that will, we'll drop it a little bit more. You can see now only the closest 3 to the camera are currently playing, and then we'll just whiz the budget back up so you can see they all come back again when you do that. Now, that's the budgeting feature, and that's one tool to sort of reduce the amount of resources we use. But what we also do is allow you to deal with what happens when all those sounds that are not allowed to play because of the budget are prevented from playing. So what we do is we have a system called an aggregation system. And every single one of those sounds that hasn't been allowed to play can contribute to a further sound that attempts to represent that crowd of sounds that were not played. So here we're going to do a really simple example. We're going to hook up a sort of more musical tone to this aggregate. And what this aggregate will do is it will represent all of those sounds that aren't playing. Now, we offer lots of parameters to this aggregation system, but the aggregate is aware of how many sounds it represents, it's aware of the position, it's aware of the spread of them. So lots of information is made available to the sound designers so that they can represent this mass of sounds with just a single audio source. Okay, so now we can see that there's a further light green blob in amongst all the dark green. And what that is that's the aggregated sound. So that will move to the center of wherever the crowd of non-playing sounds is. And as you can see, it kind of skips around in this video, but we have smoothing options so that it doesn't sort of jump around and become jarring. It just moves around as quickly or slowly as you want it to with the crowd of sounds that it's attempting to represent. And what this means for us is that it makes it a lot easier to sort of clean up the mix if you've got a lot of things that have been added to a level. They've been added by a non-audio person and with maybe not so much understanding of the consequence of that. It gives us really easy ways of dealing with that. You can see here if we increase the budget, the aggregated sound moves further away. And then if we completely reduce the budget to nothing, then you end up with just a fixed aggregated sound right in the middle of all the sounds that are playing. All the sounds that are not playing. Now, this is a really simple example. None of these sounds are moving, but if they were moving, then that blob would move appropriately to the position where all those sounds were moving.
I think what this tech has showed us is for ambience work specifically, the designers are going to have quite a lot of creative freedom to kind of go wild and rely on this technology to help us clean up not only the mix, but the voice count and the channel counts. It's also a good way for us to create accurate background dialogue, or as we call it, voila, for bespoke locations. And I think it's going to bring a lot more life to locations.
Absolutely. But also, aggregate logic doesn't have to be used for those purposes. It can be used for more abstract purposes as well. So we can use the logic system within the audio system to understand how many of a certain thing exist in the game. So if, say, every tree tells the audio system that it exists, we don't necessarily want to play a sound on all those trees, maybe unless it's windy, which is a decision we can make if we want. But we can track counts, so we can track how many of a certain object type there are, and we can use that information to inform something like the mix. So you can have a mix that's maybe specific to forests. You want something to sound like a forest. You want to bring in some ambience that makes it sound like a forest. And that can all be driven by this set of data that we're not actually playing sounds directly on, but we're just using it to inform the mix. Another feature that we have in Claudius is logic inheritance. And what that allows us to do is to implement a set of audio logic on a certain audio node and then inherit it on child nodes of that node so that we can override it, repurpose it, or make it just basically do the same thing as the parent node does. Now, that's quite an abstract thing to say, I know, but what it means is that we can use a single set of events and parameters to express audio across multiple nodes in the game.
I think this comes back to the example that we used before about, a weapon reloading. And so by overriding that logic, we're going to be able to place audio events on specific parts of the weapon and make them perform based on what the character is doing. It just seems like a really powerful tool to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's all about putting all the power in your hands.
Yeah.
For example, you might have something like a character who jumps and lands, and that jump event can be expressed on any bone of his body. So if he's wearing a watch, you can make it jingle.
Yeah.
If he's got a cracky knee, you can make it crack when he lands or something. And all these different things can be done, and they're all available to you by default.
And quite easy to implement as well, as we're seeing.
Another thing we have in Claudius is a set of systemic parameters. And what they are is a set of parameters that are available by default to any audio node in the game. Things such as atmospheric pressure, velocity, acceleration. So for example, you can do something like take the atmospheric pressure and the acceleration of an object, and you can use that to express some wind noise. And that's something that previously would have required code support, but you guys can just dive in and do it on literally anything. You can add a SIG audio component to something that the audio system's never seen before, and you can start expressing the audio on these things in this way.
Claudius, I think, rationalizes the whole process of being a sound designer on this project. All that relevant information is going to be in one place, and it's going to be quite digestible, especially for people just getting started.
Yeah, absolutely. We want the sound design process to be as organic as possible, and we want you guys to have the freedom to just express yourselves, and that's the point of getting all this data to you by default. So let's take a look at an example of something you can do using SIG Audio and Claudius without any code support. Here, we're adding a SIG Audio component to an entity type that's never had one on it before. It's a really simple thing to do. We just drop the component in DataForge, and then we can jump over to the editor and we can spawn one of these things. And I'm going to use the example of a plushie here. And what we're going to do is we're going to use some of these systemic parameters and events that come for free without any extra code support, and we're going to use them to express. It's a bit of a silly example. We're going to use them to express the contents of this plushie. So what looks like a cuddly toy right now is going to turn into some sort of water container. So we're going to put a kind of water sloshing loop on this thing. So we need to respond to its spawn event and also its despawn event. So the sound stops if it ever gets despawned. And we can add an audio source that is the water sloshing sound. And then if we hook that up, it's going to start playing that sound. But the way these sounds are set up is that they don't play anything unless certain parameters are set on them. So they're muted until, for example, they have some sort of rotational or directional movement on them, because you don't want an object to just sit there playing a sloshing sound when it's not moving. So we're going to hook up some parameters as well. We're going to hook up the systemic acceleration and velocity parameters. And we're going to just demonstrate a little bit of, we're not going to go into sort of too complex logic here, but we're just going to demonstrate a little bit of what you can do. So we're going to multiply them by each other. And then the result of that, we're going to set it on a couple of parameters on that object. And then, as I said before, everything is live updated. So we're going to see the result of what we do here. We're going to hear the result of what we do here immediately once we've done it. So just finish hooking this up, and we'll pass over to the editor view once that's done. Oh, one last thing we need to do before we can make that happen is, because this entity's already spawned, we need to send its spawn event again. And in Claudius, you can send any events that are set up for debugging reasons, which is really useful. So now we can see the green blob, which says the sound's playing, but we can't hear very much because there's no velocity or acceleration. Now, as the character runs around carrying it, we can hear the sloshing sounds, we can hear them play when it's dropped, and all this is coming from this set of parameters in Claudius that are being multiplied together just for a bit of fun. So all that was done without any code support. The code system had never seen that entity before. It could have been literally any entity in the game. And what we've done there is we've been able to express the contents of that entity without any additional help from the code team. So that's a really sort of freeing thing for the sound designers to have available.
As we've seen with how easy it is to implement something like this, we have a lot of control over the physics, and it gives us no reason not to add sounds to literally everything in the game that's interactable and that can move, it's going to bring a lot more life. The speed that we can get this done with, it's going to make iteration a lot more plausible. And yeah, I think it's going to have quite some interesting outcomes. So yeah, it opens up a line of creativity. It opens up a line of experimentation. And that goes, hand in hand with how quickly this was achieved.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the example there was quite a silly one. It was putting a water sloshy sound where it doesn't really belong. But as I said, it doesn't matter what that entity is. It could be a little cuddly plushy thing, or it could be like a 400-foot tower that's falling and hitting the ground. And those same parameters can be used to express the sounds of that thing, to express the weight and the size of that thing. And, this tech isn't sort of limited to props and carryables. It can be used on literally anything. Anything that can move, you can express its movement using these parameters.
I think you touched on a really important point there, which is cause and effect. I think that's one thing that it's quite a tricky phenomenon to implement into games. But with Claudius, it's going to be, almost a breeze. We're going to be able to hold values based on a parameter, for example. So let's say if you shoot this plushie, it'll, trigger a very high value for that movement, and based on that we'll be able to change the sound that happens after. So let's say if you shoot the plushie, pick it up again, instead of a cute cuddly noise, it can make like a really angry, like, why did you shoot me, sort of grumble. And yeah, it's going to add a whole new level of depth to these interactable objects and other things in the game as well.
Yeah, and those examples are just, again, it's all about unleashing creativity.
Exactly.
It's about sort of offering all the data that you need to be able to do whatever you want. And there may be things that we never even thought of, but by abstracting these systems in such a way that, and by making all this data available to you, it no longer becomes a coder's problem what you guys want. We just give you everything.
Yeah.
The SIG Audio and Claudius systems are designed with collaborative working in mind too. So the way that communication and the way that actions are performed in Claudius is that the Claudius app sends a request to the game engine to make some sort of change to the audio logic, and only when that request is fulfilled does the change actually reflect itself back in the Claudius UI. And this is tied into that whole concept of there's only one set of data owned by the engine and we change it live. So by having this design, what we've been able to do is allow multiple connections of multiple Claudius clients. And because they're all connected via WebSockets, they could be on separate PCs. What this means is that if a sound designer needs some assistance or just wants to collaborate with another sound designer on some sort of logic setup in Claudius, they can do that incredibly easily. They can connect their Claudius client to somebody else's game client simultaneously while that person has their copy of Claudius connected. And then as they make changes to the logic, they're reflected on both users' Claudius screens simultaneously.
I think that's quite a cool feature to have. A lot of the time when we're working, I'll need to call up either technical sound designer or a colleague and share my work, and they'll just be through sharing the screen, and there's a lot of, no, go there, and finger pointing, and it can be quite time consuming and make it difficult to quickly get a point across. And with this tool, I'll be able to, like you said, connect and just mark up, a gun, for example, or one of these physics prop on the go. With them, and that can also spark quite a few ideas, just that very easy back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And every connected Claudius client has full control. So anyone can make any changes. Even the undo system works across all clients. So you could make a load of changes to demonstrate something and then disconnect. And then the other person can just hit the undo button to get rid of all that stuff and then start, doing something else that's maybe inspired by what you showed them or something like that. And I think it all just really sort of lends itself to having a lot of collaboration between sound designers, which is always a good thing.
I think now with the whole working from home situation, a tool like this is really going to be invaluable. It's going to allow the sound designers to connect a lot more. QA to work with sound designers is a lot easier. Technical sound design, dialogue. It's really just going to, bring us all closer together and hopefully spark some very interesting ideas.
So let's take a little look at some of the code that underpins these systems, because when we went away and wanted to start designing this thing, we obviously had workflow in mind, and we wanted that to be to create a situation that was as smooth and as easy as possible for sound designers. But as a code team, we serve two masters. And what we don't want to do is to implement those things for the sound designers at a cost that's too great for the engine team. So we need to avoid high CPU usage. We need to avoid blocking the main, the critical paths of the game. And we do that by moving all of our audio processing onto audio threads and onto audio jobs. And all the commands that cause that audio processing to happen are all transmitted through lockless queues. And what that means is that the game can tell us what we need to know, and we get out the way as quickly as possible. And that allows the game to run as freely as it can without audio sort of contributing to frame rate drop or contributing to high CPU usage. Because we've moved all that stuff into the audio system, what it means is that something like a feature that we would have maybe in ship code, like something that's very specific to thrusters, would now become a systemic feature in the audio system. And what that means is, again, it frees up your creativity, because we might have created something as an idea that assists with making thrusters sound good, but instead of it being kind of hidden away in the thruster code and only able to be used by those, it's now available to you wherever you want. And you can kind of use some of these tools in whatever sort of creative ways you can think of, whereas before they were hidden away, now they're completely available to you. And this also frees up audio coders' time, because we spend a lot less time sort of, working to make features that exist in one place, exist somewhere else. Literally, every feature exists everywhere for every system. So that, again, sort of helps the audio code team to spend a lot more of their time being creative too, which is a really good position to be in. We also have some features that even bring audio code into the realm of post-production, much like the sound design is. So we can live rebuild the code while the game is running. And that's something we've been able to do for a long, long time. But what Claudius does, because it uses this reactive programming model and it can react to the game's transmission of events and parameters immediately and present them to you immediately, we can actually boot up the game and start up a feature we've never seen before and start playing around with it and find the bits where the audio needs to be. And then we can live add the code, rebuild it on the fly, and then it's already available to you guys. So we're making it so that collaboration between sound designers and audio coders becomes something that is just, it's almost as good as a collaboration between sound designers. It's like something we can go from nothing to a fully working feature without stopping the game. And then because of all the design that this is all built on, and all the way that we want to make sure that everything persists, you don't need to go back into the game and test it. What that means is that we can effectively implement both the code and the audio setup, save it, and we're literally done. And that's just saving so much time compared to sort of all the iteration time that they spent rebooting the game, rebooting editors, rebooting tools, swapping tools, and all that kind of thing. So yeah, this puts code, at least partially in this post-production realm as well.
Yeah.
So we've looked at a lot of the features that we've already developed for Claudius, but we have lots of plans for the future too. The design of SIG Audio and Claudius aims to solve future problems before we know what they are, and where it can't solve them completely, it's going to make it easier to solve them. As new game features come along, and we don't know what they're going to be yet necessarily, we want to be able to support them as quickly as possible, but also we want to be able to reuse everything we create. And the SIG Audio and Claudius design is central to that. It's all about reuse, and it's all about having systemic features that are available to sound designers.
I think what's so great about this technology is that we're going to be able to take all this information from the game, bring the audio engine into the game engine, and just make it all so easy to access. I think one key aspect of Claudius that the audio team is really looking forward to is sympathetic audio. So this is the cause and effect that we were talking about before. I think having this one event trigger another, for example, it's going to make the game a lot more cinematic. Everything's going to be real time. We're not going to have to pre-render all these events, and it's basically going to become procedural, which means that a lot of these scenarios that you get into, a lot of these different contexts that you can get into while you're playing the game, we're going to accommodate them, and you're going to get really just vastly different experiences every time you do something. And this is because we can infer so much from the game data and create those links to create a beautiful experience. A lot of the time we think about like how can we sonify this nonlinear spectacle of a game, and I truly believe that that is through cause and effect. It's having things done in real time and conveying all this information to the player that can be critical. So for example, you're flying and you start to enter a debris field or an asteroid field, that all those things can start having an effect on the environment around you. You can start hearing creaks. If you're entering the atmosphere, you can tell like that your ship's going through some strain, and instead of pre-rendering it can happen in real time. It can take values from like atmospheric pressure, temperature, and it's going to be quite a amazing experience for the players.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the core of sympathetic audio is this idea of resonance, and with the sympathetic audio design that we have, we'll be able to give objects resonant frequencies, and we'll be able to make it so that if something sort of broadband in its frequency spectrum goes off, like a huge explosion or something like that, then you're going to expect a lot of metal panels and glass windows and things to rattle and resonate in sympathy. Sympathetic audio in sympathy with the explosion.
And all we really have to do is just set up the logic for that to happen, and it'll happen. And yeah, really eager and interested to see what the players are gonna have happen to them through their playthroughs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all the features that we're looking to develop are all about bringing this game to life more and making it more cinematic and making it just feel more immersive.
Yeah, super high fidelity.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're looking at sort of improving the mixing support so we can gather some of this. We've got a huge amount of data coming in now that can be used in lots of ways to decide which sounds play and what how those parameters affect those sounds. But we can take a step back and look at the bigger picture and say, we've got all this data that's telling us what's going on in the game. Can we then use that to sort of decide how the game should be mixed? So, for example, if you're exploring a moon or something like that, you're going to want to hear a lot of the ambiances and maybe some distant mining going off and things like this. But then if you sort of end up engaged in battle with someone, that's something that the audio system's aware of through the data that's coming in, and maybe it can change the mix so that those ambient things don't really get so much of a look in anymore, and it's all about the battle focus and things like that. And then again, as the battle ends and that kind of scenario falls away, we could automatically analyze the data and say, okay, we're now back into an ambient situation, so let's raise the level of some of these ambient sources again.
Yeah, I think that importance to what the player needs to hear at that moment. I think that's especially on the FPS side, that's gonna really be valuable.
So that concludes our look at some of the features and tech that we have in development in the SIG Audio team right now. Hopefully, it's going to make the lives of the sound design team much easier, and hopefully some improvements to the way the game sounds too.
Yeah, I think the sonic aesthetic of this game is going to change for the better because of these tools and because of these workflow improvements.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's it from us. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoy the rest of your CitizenCon, and I really hope next year we can all be back together in person and we can see each other in person then. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Cosmonaut is the premier online magazine for Star Citizen, packed full of ship reviews, outfitting guides, upcoming events, org interviews, current affairs, history, and more. Cosmonaut is your comprehensive guide to all aspects of life among the stars. Our talented team of writers, editors, designers, photographers, and artists are all passionate pilots and aim to bring you stellar images, incisive articles, and incredible design. Season 1 of Cosmonaut is available for download now. Head to www.cosmonautmagazine.com to get all 12 issues completely free.
I've heard them say, with every goal comes a sacrifice. With every dream comes a letdown. You've got to give up something to get that big thing you're chasing. I couldn't disagree more. See, everything is achievable, and you don't have to give up anything along the way. You want to know what I think? Sacrifice. is what happens when you give up halfway. The Origin 300i. Sacrifice nothing. Achieve anything.
This is Jack. Jack is a successful trader. Unfortunately for Jack, he encounters local pirates. They want ransom money, just a fraction of his profits. Jack refuses the proposal. In his mind, he is a hero. Now, Jack is dead, and all of his belongings go to the pirates anyway. Don't be like Jack. Be smart. Pay ransom. Sponsored by the Sinister Incorporated Ransom Campaign.
So, Marcus, you work for Addison's campaign, right?
Yeah.
Did you guys get some sort of a winner's bonus?
Well, yeah, we got a bonus.
Oh, you did? How much?
I did get myself a Phoenix as a going away present.
They got you a Constellation Phoenix?
Hang on, why are we traveling on this rental Taurus, Marcus?
How was I supposed to know you'd prefer the Phoenix?
Oh, God, Marcus. You know what? I'm just gonna go have a shower.
Route has been plotted. Quantum in 10.
Guys, there are no towels.
You know, I think I had some towels in the Phoenix.
Oh, no, just stop.
Sorry.
Do not underestimate the talented and dedicated folks at CIG Audio. There is always a giant emphasis on video here, but none of it would ever hit the way that it's supposed to without that A to that V. And as we near the end of our show, we also saw the last of our community videos during the break, and I hope they stick around as a tradition for CitizenCons going forward. For those of you who know my origin story, you might understand why I have a particularly soft spot for them. But that's enough chat. This is it. We're at the end of our day. It's time for one more panel and one more panel alone. It's time for Tony, Rob, Ben, and Luke to take you deep into the machinery beneath our universe in systematic gameplay. Stream of thought. Bon appetit.
Hi, I'm Tony Zervek, Director of Persistent Universe for Star Citizen. Today I'm going to tell you about some of the new technology, features, and content that we're aiming to deliver over the next several quarters, and how these things are going to impact your gameplay experience. To assist in that endeavor, I brought along a few others to give you some additional perspective, including SGS Assistant Director Rob Reininger, Senior Systems Designer Ben Dorsey, and over in the UK, Lead Designer Luke Presley. Rob, we've been able to buy and sell commodities for years, but we're now looking to try and close out the entire loop by the end of the year by allowing players to sell weapons, armor, clothing, and eventually ships back to the shops. One of your favorite aspects of this has always been what it means to treasure. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
I think it's huge because now it gives me a purpose to go out and collect the stuff, because players are very meticulous. They'll go out and pick up every single gun, weapon, armor off of other players. Like loot generation is something that the Frankfurt team is working on. It means a lot for investigating lockers or just stripping down something. We talk about salvage. These are all things that are working towards the ability to buy and sell items. But most importantly, it's just curating your inventory, right? It's getting rid of this stuff. It's another form of reward. So I think it's a huge addition to the game.
Sure, and it also plays a big role in character advancement, right?
Yeah.
Because you can realize the equity from items that you've purchased in the past. In other words, I buy a particular laser rifle. Now I decide that I want the better one. I don't have to buy that one starting from scratch. I can actually sell my original one, assuming it's in pretty good shape, and I basically pick the optimal shop at which to sell it. That's a shop that deals in that specific item. Then I can actually get a pretty good price for that used item. I can then take that money and apply it and the differential towards moving up the ladder and basically getting better and better stuff. And so just like in the real world, it's like you don't usually start from scratch and buy a house and then basically have to buy another one from scratch. You basically take your realized equity in your original and you throw it into the other one and you just pay the difference.
Yeah, and that's something that we don't have in the shops right now. Everything is in the shop on a per item basis, and items sometimes come with default loadouts on them, like a sniper rifle or a set of armor, or ships are a great example of something that comes with a default loadout of certain laser cannons and power plants and etc. So as we go forward with selling, one of the things that we want to do is get an itemized price for every single attachment that's on an item, which includes laser scopes, magazines, any underbarrel attachments, right? Things like that. So now that these have their own individual price, it's much easier for us to tune the economy. So now it's this thing is more expensive or less expensive. As stats change, we can keep up with the statistical improvement of the item on a per item basis.
Sure, you have the macro item. It consists of the child items. We change the price of the child item, and the macro item, the larger item that includes various quantities of this, its price is automatically adjusted, which is not something that happens now and causes us countless problems.
Yeah, and it means that now we have less moving parts to worry about on a global basis, and from a what does the world have for sale in it. You talked about taking something to a shop that deals in those items. It's kind of the concept of, well, this shop deals in it and they refurbish it. They have an invested value in procuring those things back from people in the universe. So we want to encourage players to go around to the different places that have the best price for it, much like commodity trading, right? We want players to go here because they can buy it for the best price, go here because they can sell it for the most money. Same principle for selling items, right? So this shop deals in it, you should be able to go there and get more money for it.
Sure, and we need this more sophisticated method of determining the pricing of the more complicated items that are composed of lots of child items, partially because of what it means to selling. In other words, when I go to sell my my pistol, I may have a custom scope on it, something for which we don't have a specific entry in our global retail products list, and that says this item should, if it were new, cost this much. This winds up becoming something to where, sure, we've got the base price of the pistol and we've got the base price of the scope, but we don't have any sense of what the combination is. As of right now, we don't have a means of solving that, and so this is why we are going to be pursuing changing even how the shops specify their default inventory. Like right now, we actually have shops specify every individual item that they can sell, as opposed to where we're going is it'll be classes of items. This this particular shop deals in in small handheld weapons from this particular manufacturer. Now, because they actually deal in small handheld weapons, they will in fact purchase small handheld weapons from a different manufacturer. Right. You just won't get quite as good a price because they're not as adept at repairing them, and they don't have a clientele that's that's geared towards purchasing those items, etc. If you wanted to realize the best possible price, then you would wind up taking your specific items to a shop that dealt in those specific things. That's right. And that's where, assuming the condition was perfect and assuming that the shop had a lot of cash on hand with which to procure these deals and so was willing to be a little bit more liberal, that's where you could potentially recoup 70, 80, 85% of your original value. Whereas if you go to someone that simply sure they deal in small arms, but not necessarily that, that particular manufacturer, not, that particular caliber weapon or whatever the case may be, then maybe only get 40 or 50 cents on the dollar.
Exactly.
It's like when you're dealing with a car dealership. Like if you bring them their brand of car, they're going to pay you more for that than if you brought them something.
It's easier for them to service. Their mechanics are already familiar with it. They can do the work at cost.
They can sell it.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally makes sense.
It's big, and it's something that it just feels natural, right? It's how the world really works, and we want to continue to push that forward.
.15 is a huge update to the game because of the localized inventory that's going to totally change the game. There are several aspects to this, and that starts with, I'd say, the personal inventory manager that Rich Tyrer and